Have you ever received generic public speaking tips and thought to yourself, yeah, that's a great tip, thank you, but how the heck do I actually do what you're telling me to do? There are a lot of speakers out there who will provide you with these generic tips, but they don't really tell you how to practically apply the tips that they're giving you. Well, today we are going to change that. I am going to be demystifying 5 generic public speaking tips that are commonly told and telling you how you can practically apply them. And if you know of some generic tips that I don't share in this video, let me know in the comments down below and I will look to demystify them in future videos. But before we jump into the content of the video, if you could be so kind as to hit the like button because it really does help the channel out a lot. And if you aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure that you subscribe and click the notification bell for more content like this one. Those are very simple actions, but they do help out the channel a lot and they are greatly appreciated. And to show my appreciation, here is a cute picture of a puppy. Okay, let's jump into the content. Generic tip number 1, and this one is a bit controversial. Recite your speech in the mirror. You have 2 opposing sides to this tip. You have the people who say that this tip is totally bogus, it doesn't help, and then you have the people who swear by it and think that it is the greatest way to practice. It can lead you to think sometimes, okay, who's right and who's wrong? The honest answer is they're both correct, but this is how reciting your speech in the mirror can actually help you. First off, just by reciting your speech, you're going to make it easier for yourself to remember your speech down the line. However, whenever I practice in the mirror, and yes, I am team practice in the mirror, I generally do it to practice my facial expressions. As I'm reciting my speech in the mirror, I'm looking at the facial expressions that I make as I speak. Am I making any faces that may seem weird or unnatural? The same goes with body language. Am I doing any sort of movement that may be unnatural or awkward? Now, an alternative to this is to video record yourself and then review the recording. However, the downside to the video recording is that you don't get the immediate feedback that you would if you were looking at yourself directly in the mirror and seeing exactly what you do as you do it. On the other end, however, you have people who will say that if you practice in the mirror, it's not going to be a quality simulation as it would be if you were speaking in front of a live audience and recording yourself as you spoke to them. And in a way, they could be right. When you're live in front of an audience, your body is ready for showtime and you're going to act like it. Whereas if you're in the mirror, you know you're always going to have that safety blanket of, I can just start over again if I need to. So to make the most out of reciting your speech in the mirror, make sure that you're practicing your facial expressions or your body language and you're doing so to get feedback real time of what you're doing. Generic tip number 2, make good eye contact. Now on the surface, of course, this is obviously good advice. When you're speaking, you want to make sure that you're giving quality eye contact. But what constitutes quality eye contact? Generally for me, when I'm speaking in front of an audience, I want to make sure that I'm looking at the entire audience at some point when I am speaking. I'm looking at different spaces in the room if I have a large audience, or if I have a more intimate audience, I'm going to be looking at each individual directly in their eyes at some point in my speech. Now, in terms of time frame of how long I look at a certain person, I usually have enough eye contact to complete a thought, and then I move my eyes to the next person or the next area. To break this down a little bit more, let's take a simple sentence like, I'm running down the street. That's a simple statement, it's one thought. I would just give eye contact to one person or one area in the room as I'm giving that sentence. Now, if we expand that sentence a bit and let's say, I'm running down the street and who do I see but Bob? Those are 2 thoughts. I have running down the street and then I have who do I run into but Bob? So now I'm looking at a different area when I have that second thought. Now, one thing that I will advise you to do is not to try to make this an exact science. There is no golden rule of how long you should look at a certain person, but if the eye contact is going beyond the 5 to 7 second route, it starts to get a little awkward. Really quick story. Early in my career, there was one person who was given a presentation and she just kept looking directly at me throughout her entire presentation. It got to the point where I just had to look away and I said, okay, look at somebody else. Other people in the room caught on to it too. There was one woman in there who was just going like, hey, can you give a little eye contact to me? I'd like some attention. Generic tip number 3, don't be monotone. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This tip actually isn't that good because it is extremely hard to actually be monotone. if I were to be monotone, I would just talk like this the entire time. I'm just talking in one note, one pace, and there's really nothing that's going to be different. Normal people don't talk like this, even in their everyday conversations. Even the most inexperienced speakers do not speak like this. It is very hard to be monotone. When it comes to this tip, what people are really saying is to add more vocal variety to your speech patterns, or don't fall into the same speech patterns over and over and over again. For instance, if I was on stage giving a speech and I was talking like this all the time, where every sentence ends in the same way, this is what we're talking about when you need to add more vocal variety. Or another way that people really repeat the same speech patterns is when they end in inflection. So as they're speaking, they're always going to be raising their tone when they end their sentences. And if you hear this enough times, it will get really annoying. There are many people who I know do this, and it makes me cringe every time. Please don't do it. Now, making sure you have vocal variety is in itself a generic tip. So to really practice more vocal variety in your presentations, just try to utilize the same annotations that you use in your everyday language. It is not that difficult to have good vocal variety. Also, vocal variety doesn't just mean raising your voice or changing your pitch. When you're speaking, you can speak low sometimes, or when you're speaking, you can use emphasis to really capture somebody's attention. In addition to emphasis, you can also just utilize the pause. I love pausing. And of course, if you are able to use voices, that can always be the icing on the cake, but not required. Now, generic tip number 4, practice. Or to say it how it's normally given, practice, practice, practice. But how the heck do you actually go about practicing? To me, saying practice is like going to a buffet. There are many different options of practice. Yeah, I think I'm hungry as I was recording this video. One of my favorite ways to practice is to recite my speech into a voice recorder and then listen to the recording. When I listen to that recording over and over again, to me, that is a form of practice. However, as you are practicing, just remember that you don't have to practice the entire presentation. You can practice your presentation in pieces. When I was creating my speeches for the International Speech Contest, I would always break up the speech in little parts and practice those parts only. And then I would practice all of them later down the line once I felt that I was more comfortable with the individual parts. Something else that you can do to practice is practicing your body language. You can use the mirror technique as we talked about before, or one thing that you could do is just to not give your speech at all, but run it through your head as you do the body movements. And you should be recording yourself or looking in the mirror as you do this. And if it feels a bit awkward for you just to have complete silence, you can always utilize your voice recording, play it, and then mimic the movements as you are hearing the content in the audio recording. Another interesting tip that you can use to practice is to recite your speech as fast as you possibly can with good enunciation and clarity. This can help you identify areas in your presentation where you can actually speak faster. A lot of times, people speak very slow and perhaps too slow when they are giving a speech. On the opposite side of that, you can also go over your speech very slowly. And this is going to help you identify the parts that are going to sound better if they are said more slowly or with more emphasis or with a pregnant pause. Interestingly enough, this can help you practice some vocal variety by knowing where you want to speed up and where you want to slow down. Pacing is also part of vocal variety. So as you see, practice can mean multiple things. You need to identify exactly what it is you're practicing and how you're going to practice it. What items on that buffet are you going to end up taking? Yeah, no lie, I am really hungry right now. Tip number 5, be yourself. Now, for some people, this advice can be very dangerous. I'm going to use myself as an example. When you hear me speak, you usually hear me in a polished way. I am more poised, I am more calm. However, I have to be honest with you, that's not how I normally speak if I was around my friends. If I was around my friends, let's just say that my language would be a little bit more colorful. So when I'm on stage at a speaking event, does this mean that I'm not being myself? Well, no. Just as you would change the way you speak if you were speaking in front of your family instead of your friends, You should also change the way you speak if you are speaking in a non-professional setting versus a professional setting. What people are really saying when they say be yourself is to not try to be somebody else. If you are a more lighthearted person, you shouldn't try to be overly dramatic. Or if you are a more dramatic speaker, you shouldn't try to be lighthearted and funny if that's not the way that you usually present. In addition, you should also make sure that you're using your own personal stories and your own experiences instead of just using generic advice or stories from other people. Using other people's stories and content is called plagiarism and is very much frowned upon. Also, what people mean with this tip is to not stress yourself out, to be more calm, be more relaxed, take a breath, take a couple of breaths, but make sure that you are just trying to be as authentic as you possibly can when you are speaking to your audience.